My fiancé insisted, "We must hire this $200,000 wedding planner, nothing cheaper." I said, "Understood," but I learned he was her affair partner, and the wedding was their cover. I, Ethan, 38, male, am an investment portfolio manager. I thought my fiancé and I were building a future based on trust and partnership. It turned out she was just planning a corporate takeover, and our wedding was the smokescreen. Looking back, the memories that precede a catastrophe have a strange, fragile quality, like old photographs bathed in a deceptively warm light. You see the smiles, you remember the laughter, but your present knowledge casts a long, cold shadow over it all, revealing the cracks you couldn't or wouldn't see at the time. Our life, Isabella's and mine, was a masterpiece of such illusions. From the outside, we were the perfect couple living in a sleek apartment, with a skyline view that testified to a decade of relentless work. I managed portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars, navigating the turbulent waters of the market with a calm, analytical precision. She was a rising star in the marketing department of a rival firm, brilliant, charismatic, and ambitious. We were a power couple, or so the narrative went. An evening that now stands out in stark relief took place about 6 months before the end. It was a quiet Tuesday. I was on the sofa, immersed in quarterly reports, tracing the intricate dance of numbers that I found so logical, so reassuring. Isabella was across from me, her tablet glowing in the dim light, scrolling through glossy pages of wedding venues. The soft clicks of her screen were a counterpoint to the rustle of my papers. It was a scene of domestic tranquility, but it was the tranquility of two planets in separate orbits, held together by a shared gravity that was, unbeknownst to me, rapidly weakening. I remember looking up and thinking how fortunate I was. I recalled the early days when I'd worked 2 jobs to help her pay for her master's degree, a decision I'd never once regretted. I saw it as an investment in her, certainly, but more than that, an investment in us, in the shared future we were meticulously constructing. That belief in our partnership was my greatest vulnerability. It made me generous, and it made me blind. A few weeks later, we were at a dinner party with friends. The conversation was light, flowing easily with the wine. Then someone asked me about work, and Isabella jumped in before I could answer, her voice bright and full of proprietary pride. "Ethan is being modest," she announced to the table. "He's currently managing the Northgate Pension Fund. It's a massive account, and he's doing incredible things with it." I felt a swell of pride, mistaking her knowledge for genuine interest. But her follow-up questions became more specific, more technical. "I was just saying to Ethan the other day," she continued, looking at our friends, but speaking to me, "that their conservative allocation seems like a liability in this market. Don't you think a more aggressive short-term strategy would yield better returns for their younger members?" Our friend Mark, an engineer who thought a stock was something you put in soup, looked confused, but his wife Sarah, a lawyer, gave me a brief, quizzical look. It was a fleeting expression, a slight furrow of the brow that seemed to ask, "Isn't that confidential?" At the time, I interpreted it as simple curiosity. I saw only my fiancé engaged and brilliant, and I felt a foolish sense of satisfaction. I answered her question vaguely, steering the conversation back to safer ground, but the moment was a seed, a red flag planted and promptly ignored. The second red flag was larger, more vibrant, and waved with such theatricality that my failure to see it for what it was remains a source of profound regret. It was the matter of the wedding planner. I had researched several highly reputable firms, all with stellar reviews and reasonable budgets. I presented the options to her one evening, laid out in a neat spreadsheet. She barely glanced at it. "No," she said, her tone final. "I've already found the person. His name is Sebastian. He's the best." She showed me his website. It was slick, minimalist, and screamed expensive. His fees were nearly double our entire initial wedding budget. When I gently pointed this out, her face clouded over. The warmth vanished, replaced by a brittle, defensive chill. "Ethan, this is our wedding," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "This is supposed to be the most important day of my life. I won't have it managed by some budget cutter who does 4 weddings a month." I tried to reason with her, to talk about our long-term financial goals, but it was like arguing with a tidal wave. Her eyes welled up. "This is the one special day of my life, Ethan." She said the words, a perfectly crafted weapon of emotional blackmail. "Please don't turn it into a budget meeting." And there it was, the choice between a logical financial decision and a potential week of tense silence and tearful accusations. As I had done so many times before, I chose the path of least resistance. I relented. In my mind, I was being a supportive fiancé, indulging a bride's understandable desire for perfection. I told myself that the cost, while extravagant, was a small price to pay for her happiness, for our peace. But it wasn't peace I was buying. It was a front-row seat to my own demolition, and I was paying a man named Sebastian a staggering sum to help build the stage. The day the world ended, it began as one of the best. There is a particular cruelty in the way life offers you a perfect sunlit moment right before it throws you into the abyss. I had spent the afternoon closing a secondary but complex deal for a long-standing client. It was a victory born of patience and precision, a testament to the meticulous work I prided myself on. I left the office with a rare sense of buoyancy, the kind that makes the city air feel crisp and full of promise. On the way home, I walked past a small wine shop, the kind with bottles in the window that cost more than a week's groceries. On impulse, I went in. I bought a bottle of Italian red that was deeply absurdly expensive, the kind of wine you save for a monumental occasion. In my mind, this was one. I pictured Isabella's surprise, the way her eyes would light up. I planned the evening in my head. We would call our favorite restaurant, order whatever we wanted, and toast to the small, beautiful victories that make up a life. I stepped into our apartment, the heavy bottle cool and solid in my hand, a smile already on my face. And then the world stopped. The air in the apartment was wrong. It was still and cold, heavy, with a silence that wasn't peaceful, but empty. My smile faltered, and then I saw it. Standing by the door, placed with an unnatural neatness, was a single large suitcase. It was one of hers, a sleek, expensive piece of luggage we had bought for a trip to Paris 2 years ago. Now it didn't look like an object of travel and adventure. It looked like a tombstone. My heart began a slow, heavy pounding in my chest. I placed the wine bottle on the console table, my movements suddenly stiff and robotic. "Isabella," I called out, my voice sounding foreign in the silence. She emerged from the bedroom. She was dressed in a chic travel blazer, her makeup perfect, her hair immaculate. She looked like she was heading to a business meeting, not leaving a life behind. There were no tears in her eye, no sign of distress. Her face was a mask of cool, detached resolve. It was the face she wore during difficult negotiations at her firm. She said, her voice even and steady. She didn't move towards me. "I need to talk to you." I stood frozen, my mind struggling to reconcile the scene before me with the happy future I had been planning just moments ago. "See, I can't do this anymore," she said, the words delivered with the finality of a judge's sentence. "I'm calling off the wedding." The floor seemed to drop away beneath me. The statement was so blunt, so devoid of emotion, that for a second I thought it must be some kind of cruel joke. But her eyes were cold, her posture rigid. This was not a joke. This was an execution. My own voice was a hoarse whisper. "What? Why?" She took a small, deliberate breath, the kind one takes before delivering the final killing blow. "I'm in love with someone else." The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all the air from my lungs. My mind, usually a whirlwind of data and analysis, went completely blank. It was a system crash, a catastrophic failure. And then she twisted the knife. "It's Sebastian, the wedding planner. The man whose exorbitant fee I was paying." The absurdity of it was so immense, so grotesque, it was almost comical. All the red flags I had ignored, her insistence on hiring him, her strange defensiveness, flashed through my mind, not as a coherent warning, but as a chaotic, meaningless collage of my own stupidity. I felt a wave of nausea. I stared at her, trying to find a flicker of the woman I had loved, a hint of regret, of pain, of anything human. There was nothing. She was a stranger, a corporate raider who had just completed a hostile takeover of my life. She was waiting for a reaction, for me to scream, to beg, to break down. My mind searched for a response, for a protocol to follow in the face of total system failure. It found nothing. No data, no precedent. After what felt like an eternity, a single automated response surfaced from the wreckage of my thoughts. It was a phrase I used in meetings when presented with a piece of information so unexpected that I needed time to process. It was a placeholder for thought, not a product of it. "I understand." The words hung in the air between us, pathetic and surreal. I didn't understand. I didn't understand any of it, but it was all I could say. A flicker of something, disappointment, relief, crossed her face. This was what she had expected, a quiet, bloodless surrender. My lack of a fight was the final confirmation of the narrative she had built in her head, that I was weak, passive, a man to be shed, not contended with. "It's for the best, Ethan," she said, her voice softening now that the unpleasant business was concluded. She picked up her suitcase. The click of the handle extending was the loudest sound I had ever heard. She walked to the door without a backward glance. The door opened, then closed with a soft, final thud, and I was alone. The silence rushed back in vast and suffocating. I stood motionless for a long time, staring at the door. The expensive bottle of wine on the table seemed to mock me, a relic from a life that had ceased to exist 5 minutes ago. The initial shock began to recede, and what flooded in behind it was a pain so vast, so profound, it felt physical, like my ribs were cracking under an immense pressure. I sank onto the sofa, the grief a tidal wave that threatened to pull me under. But then deep beneath the waves of pain, something else stirred. It was a single sharp point of light in the darkness. It was anger, a cold, clear, and focused anger. It was the anger of an analyst who has just discovered that the entire system has been compromised by a single malicious actor. My grief was real, but my mind, now rebooting, began to process the event not as a tragedy, but as a betrayal, an attack. And an attack required a response. The pain was still there, but now it had a purpose. It was fuel. I reached for my phone, my hand steady. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew who I had to call. I found the number for Elysian Wedding, and I pressed the screen. The voice that answered the phone was exactly what you'd expect from a high-end events company. After hours, smooth, professional, and radiating a calm corporate authority. It was the voice of a system, not a person. It was exactly what I needed. I kept my own voice steady, draining it of the tremor of grief that still echoed in my chest. I introduced myself and explained the situation in the detached language of a formal complaint. I stated that one of their planners, Sébastien Dubois, had entered into an inappropriate relationship with his client, my fiancée, resulting in the abrupt cancellation of a significant contract. I was reporting a breach of professional conduct. The woman on the other end, a manager named Mrs. Albright, listened with a patient silence. When I finished, she didn't offer condolences or apologies. She offered something far more valuable, a confirmation that my world was not just tragically broken, but deliberately sabotaged. Mr. Hayes, she began, her tone now sharp, with a distinct note of corporate concern. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. I want to assure you we take this very seriously. To be frank, this is a severe breach. Mr. Dubois was hired on a strict probationary basis with a very specific ethics clause in his contract stemming from an unfortunate incident at his previous place of employment. Previous place of employment. The phrase hung in the air, an anomaly in the data stream of my grief. Why would she mention that? In my line of work, you learn to pay attention to the details that don't fit, the small inconsistencies that betray a larger hidden truth. I see, I said, my mind suddenly kicking into a gear I hadn't realized was still functioning. I wasn't aware he had a recent incident. There was a slight hesitation on her end. It's a personnel matter, of course, she said carefully. But given the circumstances, I can confirm his previous employer was Sterling Capital. The terms of his hiring here were contingent on there being no repeat of his past professional indiscretion. It appears he has violated those terms. Sterling Capital. The name hit me like a physical blow. It was Isabella's firm, my fiancé's company. 1,000 scattered pieces of a puzzle I never knew I was solving suddenly flew together in my mind. The dinner party conversation, her sudden intense interest in my work, her unyielding insistence on this specific absurdly expensive planner. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a conspiracy. I ended the call politely, my mind racing. The grief was still a vast ocean inside me, but now on its surface a mission was taking shape, sharp and clear as an icebreaker cutting through a frozen sea. I went to my laptop. The hours that followed were a blur of focused intensity. My skills as a research analyst, usually employed to dissect market trends and corporate financials, were now turned inward, aimed at dissecting my own life. I started with Sébastien Dubois. Using the full name from the wedding contract, I began to build a digital portrait of the man who had stolen my future. I found his professional networking profile. It was polished, listing a string of jobs at boutique firms. But there was a gap, a 2-year period that was unaccounted for. His work history mentioned Sterling Capital, just as Mrs. Albright had said, noting he had left the company 2 years ago. I cross-referenced the date with financial news archives. I found a small article in a trade journal buried on page 12. It reported that Sterling Capital had terminated an unnamed employee in their acquisitions department for attempting to sell proprietary client data to a competitor. The timing was a perfect match. A cold, sickening dread washed over me. This was no longer just about an affair. This was about my work, my career, the Northgate Pension Fund. With trembling hands, I logged into my firm's secure remote server. The process, usually routine, now felt fraught with tension. Each password, each two-factor authentication, was a step deeper into a truth I was terrified to uncover. I navigated to the server's access logs, a feature I almost never used. It was the digital record of every file opened, every piece of data touched. I filtered the activity by my own user credentials, originating from my home IP address. I began to scroll back week by week, my eyes scanning the timestamps. And then I found it. The entry was logged at 8:15 p.m. on a Tuesday 3 weeks prior. A data packet massive in size containing the entirety of the Northgate client strategy folder had been encrypted and uploaded to an anonymous offshore server. I checked my calendar for that date. The entry read, Isabella wedding dress fitting with Sébastien. The screen blurred in front of me. She hadn't been trying on dresses. She had been in our home at my computer, systematically stealing the heart of my life's work, while her lover and co-conspirator created the alibi. The betrayal was so profound, so multi-layered, it almost defied comprehension. And yet, there was one more layer to uncover. A memory surfaced, a detail I had dismissed as an annoyance at the time: the life insurance policy. 6 months ago, Isabella had insisted we update our policy. She had a lawyer friend draft a new one citing better terms. I, busy with work and trusting her completely, had signed it without much more than a cursory glance. I went to my home office, to the meticulously organized filing cabinet that was a source of pride for me. I pulled the folder labeled Insurance. My hands were steady now, my movements precise. I found the policy. I read through the dense legal jargon, but this time I read it as an analyst searching for a loophole, and I found it. Tucked away in a subclause of an addendum was a single expertly crafted sentence. It stipulated that in the event of a non-amicable separation, the primary beneficiary would still be entitled to the full payout. It was a clause designed to protect a conspirator, not a partner. I placed the policy on the desk, next to my still glowing laptop screen. The evidence was all there: the affair, the corporate espionage, the financial trap. This wasn't a romance that had gone wrong. This was a long con, a meticulously planned operation. The man who had been weeping on his sofa an hour ago was gone. In his place sat a portfolio manager who had just completed the final analysis on the most catastrophic investment of his life, and now he would begin the process of liquidation. The hours that followed my discovery were the calmest I had felt since Isabella had walked out the door. The maelstrom of grief had passed, leaving behind it a landscape of stark, cold clarity. I now understood the game that was being played, and in my world, when you understand the game, you can begin to shape the outcome. An amateur, I told myself, would have called her screaming accusations down the phone. They would have confronted her with the evidence seeking a confession, an apology, some kind of emotional validation. But I am not an amateur, I am a strategist. And a strategist knows you never reveal your position until the battlefield is prepared to your advantage. I knew they would come. Their arrogance would demand it. My one act of emotional, impulsive revenge, getting Sebastian fired, was a move they would perceive as a pathetic lashing out. They would feel the need to confront the wounded animal to assert their dominance one final time. So I prepared the scene. I didn't clean the apartment, I curated it. I took the expensive bottle of wine I had bought and left it on the kitchen counter, uncorked a single glass beside it, suggesting a man drinking alone in his sorrow. I scattered some of my research papers on the coffee table, creating an image of a life and mind in disarray. Then came the most important step. From my office equipment, I retrieved a small, wide-angle security camera, no bigger than a sugar cube. I positioned it on a high shelf among a row of architectural books, its tiny lens peeking out perfectly, framing the front door and the main living area. I connected it to my laptop. I wasn't just waiting for a confrontation, I was documenting it. I was a portfolio manager preparing for an audit. I would have every transaction recorded. I sat in the dark, the city lights painting silent, shifting patterns on the wall. I didn't feel tired. I felt a strange, hyper-aware focus. I was a player in a high-stakes chess match, and I had just discovered my opponent had been cheating from the start. My next moves had to be flawless. At 3:15 in the morning, the harsh buzz of the intercom sliced through the silence. It was followed by a series of sharp, impatient knocks on the door. Right on schedule. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and summoned the image of the man I had been just a few hours ago, broken, confused, and utterly defeated. I ran a hand through my hair to mess it up, splashed a little water on my face, and walked to the door. When I opened it, they stood there, silhouetted by the grim, fluorescent light of the hallway. Isabella was in front, her face a mask of indignation. Sebastian stood just behind her, his arms crossed over his chest, a look of smug contempt on his face. He was exactly as I had pictured, handsome in a shallow, predatory way, radiating an aura of unearned superiority. "What did you do, Ethan?" Isabella's voice was like ice. "Sebastian just got a call from his CEO. He's been terminated. Fired. Did you call them? Are you really so pathetic that you'd try to ruin his career just because your fragile ego got hurt?" This was my cue. I let my shoulders slump. I looked from her to him, my expression one of bewildered pain. I let my voice crack. I didn't know what else to do. I stammered the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "You destroyed me, Isabella. You destroyed everything we built. You just left." I was angry. I wasn't thinking straight. It was the perfect performance. I was embodying the very caricature they had of me. The emotional, irrational man-child who couldn't handle rejection. They exchanged a look, a brief, silent communication of their shared triumph. They had bought it completely. His weakness was their strength. Sebastian stepped forward, taking charge. He looked down at me, his voice dripping with condescension. "Look," he said, sighing as if explaining something to a simpleton. "It's done. It happened. We're all adults here. Get over it. Trying to lash out like a child isn't going to change anything. It just makes you look sad." The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. He stood in my home, a co-conspirator in a plot to ruin me professionally and personally, and lectured me on maturity. I had to physically restrain myself from smiling. This was better than I could have hoped. The camera was capturing every word, every contemptuous sneer. I let my gaze fall to the floor, completing the picture of a man utterly crushed. "Just go." I whispered the words, thick with a sorrow I did not feel. "Please, just leave me alone. I can't look at you both." I took a step back from the door, almost stumbling over my own feet, a final masterful touch of a man at his breaking point. Isabella let out a scoff, a sound of pure disgust for my weakness, and turned to leave. Sebastian gave me one last smirk before following her. I closed the door, the click of the lock echoing in the apartment. I leaned my back against the wood, listening to their footsteps, and their low, mocking laughter fade down the hallway. Then, for the benefit of the recording and any lingering ears, I slid down the door to the floor and let out a single ragged sob, the sound of a man who had truly lost everything. I held the silence for a long moment. Then I rose. I walked calmly into my office, the apartment still dark. On my laptop screen, the video file of the last 5 minutes was saved and ready. I watched the entire exchange, my face illuminated by the cold blue light. The man on the screen was a pathetic, heartbroken victim. The man watching him was not. The performance was over. The overture was complete, and now the war could truly begin. The first light of dawn filtering through my apartment window felt different that morning. It wasn't the gray, sorrowful light of the day before, but a sharp, clean light, the kind that illuminates every detail with an unforgiving clarity. The man who had performed a symphony of despair just a few hours earlier was gone. In his place, I rose, showered, and dressed in one of my best suits. The grief was still present, a low, humming engine of pain deep within me, but it was no longer the pilot. It was merely the fuel. Today, the strategist was in command. When I walked into my firm's main conference room at 7:30 in the morning, the faces that greeted me were a triad of corporate power: my own managing director, our firm's chief executive officer, and the head of our legal department. They had assembled at my urgent request, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and concern. They thought they were here to discuss a personal crisis affecting a senior employee. They were about to learn they were in a war. I didn't begin with the affair or the broken engagement. I began with the data. On the large screen at the end of the table, I projected the server access log. I pointed to the timestamp, the IP address, and the file size. At 8:15 p.m. 3 weeks ago, I began my voice as level and dispassionate as if I were presenting a quarterly review. Our complete strategic analysis for the Northgate Pension Fund was copied and uploaded to an untraceable offshore server from my home network. The mood in the room shifted instantly from sympathy to high alert. This was no longer about a personal problem. This was an attack on the firm itself. For the next hour, I laid out the rest of it. I presented a timeline connecting Isabella to Sterling Capital and Sebastian to both. I explained the scheme of the wedding as a costly and elaborate distraction. I detailed the financial deception, and I finished by playing the audio from the security camera footage from the night before. They heard Isabella's accusations, but more importantly, they heard Sebastian's smug admission of his indifference, confirming their conspiratorial relationship beyond any doubt. When I was finished, the CEO, a man not known for his emotional displays, simply said, "This was an act of industrial espionage. You have our full and unconditional support, Ethan. Legal cybersecurity, whatever you need. This is now a firm matter." In that moment, I was no longer a lone actor. I had the backing of an institution, a formidable machine of law and capital. My first move, with the CEO's blessing, was the one that went against every corporate instinct for secrecy. It was a preemptive strike of radical transparency. With my CEO and our head lawyer on the conference call to bear witness, I called the chairman of the Northgate Pension Fund. "John," I began, my voice calm, "I'm calling you today to report a serious matter. We recently identified and neutralized an internal security breach. It resulted in an unauthorized transfer of strategic data related to your portfolio. I want to be unequivocally clear, your assets are and have always been 100% secure. This was a theft of intellectual property, not funds. We have identified the perpetrators and are taking decisive legal action. I am informing you of this personally because our relationship is built on trust, and trust demands transparency." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him processing the information, weighing the potential risk. His response when it came was not one of panic, but of profound respect. "Ethan," he said, his voice firm, "in my 30 years in this business, I've had people lie to me, hide things from me, and blow smoke. You're the first one to call me and tell me you have a problem before I discovered it myself. Thank you. We appreciate the integrity. Keep us informed and let us know what you need from our end." He had not only stayed, he had become an ally. We had reinforced the relationship by demonstrating the one quality our competitors now lacked: honor. Meanwhile, across the city, I knew what Isabella would be doing. High on her victory, convinced I was a shattered wreck, incapable of rational thought, she would be making her move. She would be walking into her own firm's boardroom, presenting the stolen data as the fruit of her own brilliant marketing and networking. She would be hailed as a genius, a rainmaker, who was about to land the biggest client in the company's history. The confirmation of this came late that afternoon. An email appeared in my inbox. The sender was John, the chairman of Northgate. The subject line contained only 2 letters, FYI. The body of the message was blank. There was just a single attachment. I clicked it open. It was a forwarded email chain. At the bottom was a long, detailed, and eloquently written pitch from Isabella outlining a new, aggressive strategy for the Northgate Fund. Her proposal was built entirely on the data she had stolen, a perfect mirror of the confidential strategies we had been developing for the next fiscal year. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was a feeling of pure, intellectual satisfaction. It was the moment in a chess match when your opponent, in their greedy pursuit of your queen, walks their own king directly into your trap. She had underestimated everything. She had underestimated the loyalty of a client cultivated over a decade of dedicated work. She had underestimated the professionalism of a man who treated his work as a sacred trust. And most of all, she had underestimated the fatal blindness of her own arrogance. I forwarded the entire email chain to my legal team and the CEO. My only addition was a single sentence, the final piece of the puzzle. The trap was now fully set. All that was left was to let her walk into it. A plan, much like a portfolio, is only as strong as its diversification. My initial strategy was built on the foundation of my own evidence, but to make it unassailable, I needed to reinforce it with external, unimpeachable support. I needed allies. And as it turns out, when you are standing on the side of the truth, allies often appear from the most unexpected quarters. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. The caller ID showed Elysian Weddings. It was Mrs. Albright. Her voice, once a smooth corporate purr, was now tight with frustration. "Mr. Hayes," she began dispensing with pleasantries. "I'm calling with an update that I believe is mutually relevant. Mr. Dubois is predictably threatening a wrongful termination lawsuit. His claim is that we acted solely on the malicious and false report of a distraught, jilted client, that being you." I listened, a cold sense of calm settling over me. "And what was your response?" I asked. My response," she said, a sharp edge to her voice, "is that our firm does not make six-figure personnel decisions based on hearsay. Mr. Hayes, Sebastian Dubois, is now a direct threat to this company's reputation. I believe we can be of assistance to one another. We are prepared to provide you with a sworn affidavit detailing the precise ethics and non-fraternization clauses in his probationary contract. Furthermore, we will include the documented evidence we received from Sterling Capital regarding the circumstances of his departure from their firm. We want him to know that if he proceeds with this lawsuit, he will be facing not just you, but us, and our evidence is considerable. An alliance, forged not from friendship, but from a shared enemy, and a mutual interest in the truth. I would appreciate that very much, Mrs. Albright, I said. Please have your legal team send the documents to mine. I now had a powerful, credible third party willing to testify to Sebastian's pattern of unethical behavior. The narrative of the distraught, jilted client was dead on arrival. The next move was colder, more difficult, but strategically essential. On the firm advice of my lawyers, I authorized them to file an emergency motion in civil court. We petitioned for an immediate freeze on all joint financial assets, bank accounts, credit lines, investment portfolios, pending a formal investigation into a conspiracy to commit fraud. It was a brutal, decisive action. Part of me, the man who had loved Isabella for 5 years, recoiled at the ruthlessness of it. It felt like an act of war, but the strategist in me knew that you cannot allow your opponent to use your own resources to attack you. Her plan was funded by the life I had built. I was simply cutting off her supply lines. The effect, I learned later, was immediate and catastrophic for her. The six-figure retainer for the aggressive new lawyer she had hired. The check bounced. The credit cards she used to maintain her lifestyle declined. The secure financial world she had taken for granted was gone. The foundation vaporized overnight. She was an island, and the tide of her own making was washing away the shore. This financial severing had another predictable consequence. It destroyed the already fractured relationship between the two co-conspirators. I could almost picture the series of frantic, panicked phone calls between them. Sebastian, I reasoned, was a parasite. His affection for Isabella was contingent on her value as a host. Now, not only had she gotten him fired from a lucrative position, but she was also financially crippled. Their love affair, born of greed and opportunity, would not survive the harsh reality of consequences. It would curdle into a toxic stew of blame and mutual recrimination. They were no longer partners in crime. They were just two criminals trapped in the same sinking boat, each trying to climb onto the other to keep their own head above water. The final wall of my fortress was built during a phone call that evening. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered. The voice on the other end was deep, gravelly, and carried an authority that needed no introduction. It was Isabella's father, a self-made industrialist who had built an empire from nothing. He was a man I respected, despite finding his daughter's values to be a pale, distorted reflection of his own. "Ethan," he said, his voice a low growl, "Isabella is here telling me some wild story about you freezing her out of her own money. What the hell is going on?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the steady stream of traffic below. I owed this man the truth, but I also owed myself the protection of discretion. "Sir," I began, my voice calm and respectful, "I have always had immense respect for you, which is why I will be as direct as I can be. There are serious and complex legal matters unfolding. They relate to professional conduct and an attempt at corporate espionage. On the firm advice of my counsel, I cannot and will not discuss the specific detail. All I can tell you is that the actions I have taken were necessary to protect my career and my assets, and that every step is supported by incontrovertible evidence." The line went silent. I could hear the old man breathing, processing the words. I had not used the language of a heartbroken lover. I had used the language he understood: business law and war. The word espionage hung in the air between us. He knew his daughter. He knew her ravenous ambition. Finally, he spoke. "I see," he said, his voice heavy. He wasn't asking for more detail. He had heard enough. He knew I was not a man given to drama or exaggeration. He knew that if I used a word like that, I had the receipts to back it up. There was another long pause, and then he said something that was more significant than any apology. "You always struck me as a respectable man, Ethan. Do what you have to do." He hung up. It was not a blessing, but it was an absolution. He had withdrawn from the field of battle. Isabella had lost her last and most powerful potential ally. She was now completely and utterly alone, surrounded by the steel walls I had built left, to face the consequences she herself had engineered. In the game of chess, there is a moment known as the end game. It is the phase where the board has been cleared of noise and distraction, and the path to victory or defeat is starkly mathematically clear. The pieces are all in place for the final decisive move. For me, that moment arrived on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 month after Isabella had walked out of my life. Through a discreet inquiry, my legal team had confirmed the date and time of Isabella's career-defining presentation to the board of directors at Sterling Capital. She was going to present her strategy for acquiring the Northgate Pension Fund. It was, I knew, her coronation. The moment she would leverage my stolen work to secure the partnership she so desperately craved. She was walking into that room believing she was the queen. She had no idea she was the sacrifice. Our arrival at the Sterling Capital Tower was quiet and deliberate. We were a small, somber delegation, myself, my firm's CEO, our lead counsel, and in a move of strategic genius by our legal team, the general counsel for the Northgate Pension Fund himself. We were not there to make accusations. We were there to present a statement of fact. We were escorted to a small waiting room adjacent to the main boardroom. We could hear the low murmur of voices from within. I pictured the scene: Isabella at the head of a long mahogany table, radiating confidence, her audience of powerful executives hanging on her every word. She would feel invincible. It is a fatal flaw of the arrogant to mistake a lack of immediate opposition for a victory. At precisely 10:30, as arranged with Sterling's CEO, who we had briefed the day before, the doors to the boardroom swung open. A junior executive, his face pale, stepped out and gestured for us to enter. We walked in. The effect was immediate and electric. The murmuring stopped. 20 pairs of eyes swiveled from Isabella to us. I saw her face. The confident smile froze, then melted into a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. She saw me, then saw my CEO, then her eyes landed on the lawyer for Northgate, and a flicker of genuine terror crossed her face. She knew in that instant that the game was over. Her own CEO, a grim-faced man named Peterson, stood up. "Isabella, thank you," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Your presentation is no longer necessary. We have another matter to address." He gestured toward me. I walked to the head of the table, my footsteps the only sound in the cavernous, silent room. I did not look at her. I connected my laptop to the projector, and my presentation illuminated the screen behind me. The title was simple, stark, and brutal: an analysis of a coordinated criminal conspiracy and industrial espionage attempt, Sterling Capital and the Northgate Fund. For the next 15 minutes, I spoke. My voice was calm, my tone clinical. I was not a heartbroken man seeking revenge. I was a portfolio manager presenting an audit of a catastrophic failure. I walked them through the evidence slide by slide: the server logs with the date of the data theft highlighted in red, the sworn affidavit from Elysian Weddings detailing Sebastian's history and the ethics clauses he had violated, the video stills from the 3 a.m. confrontation proving their off-the-books relationship, the forwarded email from Northgate's chairman showing Isabella actively using the stolen data in her pitch. With each slide, I could feel the atmosphere in the room growing colder, the pressure building. The board members were no longer looking at me. They were looking at Isabella, their expressions shifting from confusion to disbelief, and finally to a cold, unified fury. She had not brought them an opportunity. She had brought them a potential multi-hundred-million-dollar lawsuit and a regulatory nightmare. Then came the final slide. It was a high-resolution scan of the insurance policy addendum. I used the laser pointer to circle the clause, the one that guaranteed her a full payout in the event of a non-amicable separation. I let the image hang there in the silence, letting the chilling implication settle in the minds of everyone present. This wasn't just about money or a job. This was about a level of premeditated malice that transcended the norms of even the most cutthroat business dealing. I lowered the laser pointer. As you can see, I concluded, my voice still even. This was never a competitive bid for a client. This was a criminal enterprise. My firm has already filed a formal complaint with the Financial Regulatory Authority and will be pursuing all available legal remedies against both Ms. Isabella Vance and any entity found to have enabled her. The silence that followed was broken by Mr. Peterson. He rose slowly to his feet, his face a thundercloud. He did not look at me. He looked only at Isabella, who sat as if turned to stone, her face ashen white. He picked up his phone, pressed a button, and spoke in a low, dangerous voice. "Security, to the main boardroom. Now." He disconnected the call, and looked at the head of his security, who had just appeared at the door. His final command was delivered with a quiet, absolute finality that was more devastating than any shout. "Well, get her out of here immediately, and make sure she touches nothing on her way out." The two security guards moved towards her. She didn't protest. She didn't speak. She simply stood a ghost in an expensive suit as they escorted her from the room, past the horrified and contemptuous stares of the colleagues she had tried to deceive. The heavy oak door of the boardroom clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing like a gavel on the coffin of her career. 6 months have passed since that day in the boardroom. It's a strange thing, the passage of time after a major upheaval. At first, every day is a struggle, a conscious effort to put one foot in front of the other. Then one day you wake up and you realize you haven't thought about the catastrophe for a whole morning, and then a whole day, and you know in that quiet, unassuming way that you are beginning to heal. The fallout from that day was, I'm told, immediate and total. The story of Isabella's spectacular public implosion became a quiet legend in the city's financial district, a cautionary tale whispered in after-work drinks and board meetings. From what I've gathered through the industry, Grapevine Sterling Capital settled with my firm for an undisclosed but undoubtedly substantial sum to avoid a protracted and embarrassing public lawsuit. Isabella was, of course, blacklisted. No reputable firm would touch her. The last I heard, she was doing freelance marketing work for a small tech startup, her grand ambitions reduced to writing ad copy for a mobile app. And Sebastian, his fate was equally grim. His threatened lawsuit against Elysian Weddings evaporated the moment my legal team shared their affidavit with his lawyer. Facing his own legal bills, and with no financial support from Isabella, he turned on her, launching his own countersuit, claiming she had deceived him and manipulated him into his professional ruin. Their great passionate love affair, the one for which they had torched my life, had devolved into a pathetic squabbling lawsuit over who was more to blame for their own failed crime. It was a fittingly ugly end to a partnership built on nothing but greed. I did not follow the proceedings with any sense of glee. By then their fate had become an abstraction to me, a distant echo from a life I no longer live. My own life had become my focus. I sold the apartment we had shared, the one with the skyline view that was now tainted by memory. I moved into a new place, smaller but brighter, with large windows that faced the morning sun. It was a minimalist space filled only with my books, my music, and the quiet hum of a life rebuilt on my own terms. It was a space that felt clean. My work, the very thing she had tried to steal, became my sanctuary and my triumph. The Northgate Pension Fund, impressed by our firm's integrity and my handling of the crisis, not only stayed but deepened their relationship with us. My own firm, in turn, recognized my action. I was promoted to senior partner. They said it was for my skill in retaining our most important client, but I knew it was also for my character, for proving that in the long run, honor is the most valuable asset on any balance sheet. I sometimes think back to the phone call I had with Isabella's father a few weeks after the boardroom confrontation. He had called me one evening. The conversation was brief. He didn't apologize for his daughter. That wasn't his way. He simply said, "I heard you handled the transition at Northgate with class, Ethan. A respectable man finishes the game he starts." And then he hung up. It wasn't forgiveness or friendship, but it was a form of closure, an acknowledgement from one professional to another that a difficult but necessary job had been done correctly. Tonight I am standing on the balcony of my new apartment. The autumn air is cool and clean against my face. The city spreads out before me, a glittering tapestry of light and life. For a long time after everything happened, this view felt hostile, a reminder of the ambition and deception that lurked behind the beautiful facade. But now it just looks like a city, a place of possibility, a place where things are built and sometimes where things must be torn down to make way for something stronger. The satisfaction of seeing their plan crumble was real, but it was also fleeting, like the heat from a fire that quickly burns out. It was the justice of an ending. But this feeling right now is different. This quiet, this sense of being whole in my own space, of being the sole architect of my own life. This is the justice of a new beginning. In the end, I realized the best revenge wasn't their downfall, but my own peace, and I had found it. I take a deep, slow breath, and for the first time in a very long time, I feel completely and utterly free. Of course, here is the conclusion, written according to the blueprint. Conclusion. Today's story is a powerful, if painful, reminder that the most devastating betrayals are often born not from a fleeting moment of passion, but from cold, deliberate calculation. The core lesson here isn't truly about revenge, but about the profound strength found in clear-headedness. When faced with an unthinkable emotional blow, Ethan's greatest weapon was not his anger, but his intellect. He used the very skills he had honed in his professional life, analysis, logic, and a respect for the facts, to dismantle a conspiracy that was designed to destroy him. It's a testament to the idea that sometimes the most effective response to a loud betrayal is a quiet investigation. Many of us in our own lives have likely felt the sting of our trust and hard work being taken for granted. It is a deeply wounding experience. The lesson from Ethan's journey is to allow yourself a moment to feel that pain, but not to live in it. The path to reclaiming your life is to shift from the role of the victim to that of the strategist. Protect yourself, your career, and most importantly, your peace by acting decisively and intelligently based on the truth you uncover. What are your thoughts on this? Which do you believe leaves a deeper scar, a betrayal of the heart or a betrayal of professional trust? Or perhaps are they simply two different symptoms of the same fundamental flaw in a person's character? Please share your own stories and wisdom in the comments below.